The courtroom was packed, every seat taking the air thick with tension. In the center of stale coffee at the center of it all sat Jasmine, a young black woman barely 24, in a modest blazer, and slacks, her hair neatly tied back, hands folded on the defense table. She looked calm, but inside her heart was pounding. The man seated above her on the bench, Judge Roberts, glared down through rimless glasses, his voice sharp enough to cut steel. "Miss Williams," he began, his tone dripping with disdain. "I see. You're a type in here all the time, reckless, entitled, thinking the law doesn't apply to you." Jasmine kept her eyes forward. She wasn't here to make friends. She was here for justice. The charges were bogus, a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But Roberts didn't see her as a human being. He saw the stereotype. His next words drew a murmur from the crowd. "Maybe if you people learned some respect for the law, we wouldn't be in this position." Jasmine felt heat rise in her chest, but she stayed silent. Her attorney, a middle-aged public defender, whispered, "Stay calm. Don't take the bait." Roberts leaned forward, his gavel tapping. "You were caught trespassing on private property at night. You expect me to believe you weren't up to no good?" Jasmine lifted her chin. "I was there to collect evidence for a case, sir." Roberts scoffed. "Evidence? Please, you're not a lawyer. You're barely out of college." Jasmine's jaw tightened. He had no idea who she was, but that was about to change. The prosecutor smirked, playing along with the judge's mood. The more they painted her as foolish, the quicker conviction. Roberts waved a hand. "Enough. I'll hear closing arguments. But don't waste my time." Jasmine's attorney began speaking, but Roberts interrupted again. "I want to make an example. Here are young people thinking they can bend the law to their will." Jasmine's heart thudded. Every insult, every slight was fuel. But she remembered her father's words, "Never let them see you lose control." She took a deep breath. The courtroom doors open, heads turned. A tall man in a tailored navy suit strode in the room, shifted instantly. It was District Attorney Charles Williams, Jasmine's father. Roberts froze mid-sentence. "Mr. Williams, what a surprise, sir. I didn't expect you today." The Daw's voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable authority. "I'm here for my daughter's case." Roberts blinked. "Your daughter?" The murmur turned into a buzz. Jasmine's last name, Williams, now carried a different weight. Roberts cleared his throat, trying to recover. "I wasn't aware." That a step closer, looking the judge dead in the eye. "Perhaps you should have been aware before making prejudiced assumptions about a woman. You've never met." The judge's face drained of color. Charles continued. "My daughter was on that property with my full authorization, investigating corruption tip that, by the way, involves members of this very court." The entire room went silent. Jasmine finally looked up, meeting Roberts's gaze, and in that moment the power shifted completely. She wasn't a scared young woman anymore. She was the daughter of the man who could dismantle careers with single press conference. Roberts stammered, If that's the case, perhaps these charges should be reconsidered." The Daw's voice hardened. "They will be dismissed immediately, and you will formally apologize to Miss Williams." Roberts swallowed hard. "Yes, of course, Miss Williams. My apologies." Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't need to. She simply said, "Apology. Noted, Your Honor." The bailiff cleared his throat. Case dismissed. The gavel hit the block, but the sound was hollow. The crowd watched as Jasmine and her father walked out together, heads high. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, microphones flashing questions. Jasmine stayed silent, letting her father speak. This was a lesson for every young person. He said, "Never let someone in power define your worth. And for those in power, never assume you know a person's story based on how they look or where they come from." But as they stepped into the car, Jasmine's phone buzzed. An unknown number. She answered. A low voice came through. "You don't know me, but I know what you found that night. You were on the right track." Jasmine's grip on the phone tightened. "Who is this?" The voice chuckled. "Careful, Miss Williams. There are people who will do anything to keep you from digging deeper." Jasmine glanced at her father, who was watching her closely. The line went dead. She stared out the window, knowing this was far from over. The trial may have ended, but the real fight had just begun. The next morning, Jasmine woke up to the faint sound of her father's voice in the kitchen. He was on the phone, speaking in a tone she recognized as serious, something about sealed files and high-level clearance. She sat up, the words from the mysterious caller replaying in her head. "There are people who will do anything to keep you from digging deeper." She dressed, quickly grabbed her laptop, and scrolled through the photos she had taken the night she was arrested. Grainy, but clear enough to see a group of men meeting behind a warehouse, exchanging envelopes and shaking hands. One of the men wore a city council lapel pin. Jasmine knew that face. She had seen it on campaign posters. When she walked into the kitchen, her father hung up and gave her a look, half concern, half calculation. "Jasmine, we need to talk about what you found that night." He said. She nodded, but before they could continue, a knock echoed at the front door. Her father checked the peephole then. Tense, "It's Detective Morris from the Precinct Jasmine's brow furrowed. Wasn't he one of the people in the warehouse? Charles opened the door. Morris stepped in with a polite smile, but his eyes were sharp. Morning to Williams. Morning, Miss Williams. He said, I just came by to remind you, Miss Williams, that trespassing charges can be refiled if new evidence comes to light. Jasmine crossed her arms. You mean to warn me? Detective Morris's smile didn't falter. Just letting you know the law can be flexible. He tipped his hat and left. Jasmine turned to her father. They know I saw them. Charles was silent for a long moment, then said, I think it's time you saw something. He led her to the study, unlocked a drawer, and pulled out a thick file. Inside were photos, documents, bank records, all pointing to a corruption network stretching from local business owners to high-ranking officials. Jasmine's eyes widened. This is huge. Why haven't you acted her father's side? Because every time I try, someone higher up blocks me. But now with what you found, we might have enough to blow it open. Jasmine was about to respond when her phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. She answered. The voice was urgent. They're coming for you right now. Get out of the house. Jasmine froze, glancing at her father's footsteps. Suddenly thudded outside on the porch. A shadow moved past a window. Her father whispered, stay calm, but the sound of gun slide being racked came from the other side of the door. Jasmine's heart pounded, and before she could move, the front door burst open. The door slammed against the wall, and three men in dark tactical gear stormed in, weapons drawn. Jasmine instinctively stepped back, but one of them barked, sit down now. Charles stepped forward, his hands raised. Easy, gentlemen. You're making a mistake. The lead man pulled off his mask, revealing Councilman Drake, the very same man from the warehouse photos. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. Drake's voice was cold. Miss Williams, you've been a very curious young woman, and curiosity is dangerous in this town. Charles moved to shield her, but one of the men grabbed him, shoving him into a chair. Jasmine's mind raced. She glanced toward her laptop on the counter. If she could just get to it, she could send the files to every news outlet in the city. Drake seemed to read her thoughts. Don't even think about it, he said, almost smiling. We're here for the originals, and whatever copies you made. Jasmine tried to play them. Originals of what? But Drake only chuckle wheel. Search the place. Jasmine's eyes flicked to her father, who gave her the faintest shake of his head, warning her not to speak. The men began tearing through drawers and cabinets, knocking over books and papers. As they searched, one of them found a file from the study and handed it to Drake, who flipped through the pages, nodding. This is what we needed, boys. Bag it up. Jasmine's fists clenched. If they left with that file, everything would be gone. Drake leaned close to her face. You could have had a nice, quiet life, Miss Williams, but now you've made enemies you can't handle. Suddenly, the sound of tires screeching came from outside. Multiple car doors slammed. Then a voice boomed from the porch, drop your weapons and step outside now. Jasmine recognized it immediately. It was District Attorney Michael Stone, her father's oldest friend, and one of the few men he trusted. The intruders froze for a moment, glancing at each other. Drake's confident smirk faltered just slightly. Stone's voice came again, louder. This is your final warning. Step out, or we. Coming, the man holding Charles tightened his grip and whispered to Drake, what do we do? Drake's eyes darted between the front door and Jasmine. Then he muttered, plan B. One of the men reached into his vest, pulled out a small black device, and pressed a button. A faint beeping began somewhere deep in the house. Jasmine's stomach dropped. It sounded like a timer, and Drake smiled again. You might want to find out before it hit zero. The beeping grew louder, echoing to the walls. Jasmine's pulse pounded in her ears. She scanned the room, trying to pinpoint the source. Drake backed toward the door, still smiling, as if this was just another day at the office. Stone's voice from outside was now urgent. Drop your weapons and walk out slowly. Drake didn't answer. Instead, he motioned his men. One shoved Charles toward Jasmine, knocking them both to the ground. The other two began moving toward the back door. Jasmine crawled toward the kitchen, hoping the sound was coming from there, but the beeping seemed to shift, as if it was coming from everywhere. Stone suddenly burst to the front door, gun raised. Get down, Jasmine. The intruders froze momentarily. Then one of them tossed a smoke canister across the room. Thick gray clouds exploded into the air, choking visibility. Drake's silhouette was barely visible through the haze. As he shouted, you'll never make it in time. Jasmine coughed and grabbed Charles, pulling him toward the hallway. They stumbled into the study, and that's when she saw it duct taped under her father's desk, a small black box with a blinking red light. The timer read 0:43. Jasmine's hands trembled. She'd never defused anything in her life, and she didn't even know if it was a bluff. Stone's figure appeared behind them. Hurry up. We got less than a minute. Jasmine's father limped in, clutching his side, bleeding from a gash above his brow. He looked at the device, then at Jasmine, his voice low and steady. Listen to me. If this is what I think it is, we can't touch it. Jasmine's eyes went wide. Then what do we do? He glanced toward the window, the same window that overlooked the alley behind the house, and said something that sent chills down her spine. We let it go off. Jasmine froze, staring at him in disbelief. And that's when the timer hit 0:21. Jasmine's mind raced. Why would her father say that? Stone's voice cut through the haze. What do you mean, let it go off? We need to evacuate. Now her father's eyes didn't waver. Because it's not just a bomb, it's a signal. Jasmine looked back at the device, the blinking red light. Almost hypnotic. Stone glanced between them, his finger tight on the trigger signal. For what her father's tone was grim for them to finish the job before anyone can stop them suddenly. The back door slammed open. Two more masked men rushed in, one carrying a duffel bag, the other holding what looked like a small remote. Jasmine's stomach dropped. She knew without asking that remote was connected to the bomb. Stone fired a warning shot, but the man with the remote ducked behind the counter. Drake's laughter echoed through the smoke. You really thought this was about intimidation? No, we're here to erase everything, including your precious files. Charles, still coughing, stumbled toward the desk, but her father yanked him back. Stay away from the masked man behind the counter. Peeked out grinning and pressed a button. The timer jumped from 0:17 to 0:05. Stone cursed, and Duff recovered. Jasmine's heart pounded. She grabbed the desk phone, but the line was dead. Her father shoved her toward a window. Go now. But Jasmine froze, torn between obeying and trying to save everyone. Then the entire room was flooded with blinding white light, so bright it felt like the walls disappeared. The light faded into ringing silence. Jasmine blinked her vision slowly. Clearing the bomb hadn't gone off. Instead, a squad of armed officers in tactical gear poured into courtroom, barking commands. Freeze! Drop your weapons. The masked men hesitated just long enough for two to be tackled to ground. But Drake was already moving, grabbing the remote and slipping out the side door. Stone shouted after him, but was cut off by a flashbang going off in the hallway. Chaos erupted again. Jasmine ducked behind a bench, her father crouching beside her, his face pale. They weren't supposed to be here, yet he muttered. Jasmine's brow furrowed. Supposed to be here? What do you mean? He didn't answer, instead pulling a small key from his pocket and pressing it into her palm. No matter what happens, take this to the old records room downtown. And don't trust anyone, not even Stone. Jasmine felt her pulse spike. Why not trust Stone before her father could reply? A shadow fell over them and a cold voice said, because Stone works for me. Jasmine slowly looked up into the smirking face of Drake, standing over them, remote still in hand. Jasmine's throat went dry as she stared up at Drake, the remote still in his hand, the faint blinking light reflected in his eyes. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Don't trust anyone, not even Stone. But why? How could Stone be working with this man, the one who had nearly blown them all up? Drake's smirk widened, as if he could read her thoughts. You really think your little badge family are the good guys? Kid's voice was low, almost calm, but it carried over the scattered shouts of officers still trying to secure the other suspect. Your father never told you the truth, did he? Your father shifted his weight, his jaw tight. Don't listen to him, Jasmine. He's just trying to split us apart. Drake chuckled. Split you apart? You're already on opposite sides. You just don't know it yet. He tossed the remote lightly from one hand to the other like a toy before sliding it into his pocket. The gesture made Jasmine tense, because if that device was still armed, they were all seconds away from disaster. She glanced toward Stone, who was standing a few feet behind Drake, his gun lower, but his eyes on her, and in that instant she saw it flicker. Guilt, or was it fear? Whatever it made her stomach twist. Drake turned slightly, giving Stone a small nod like two old friends sharing a secret. So it was true. Her father's hand closed over her arm, pulling her closer to him. The key in her palm felt heavier than before. Drake's voice cut through again. You know why I'm here, Jasmine? Because you have something I need, and you're gonna give it to me, or we'll see how loud this place gets. Jasmine tightened her grip on the key. Even though she didn't fully understand its importance, she knew one thing: she wasn't handing it over. Drake's smile faltered just slightly at her silence. It was like static. Jasmine could feel every heartbeat thudding in her ears as the slump against the bench, his face pale. Her father's grip on her arm tightened painfully, and she realized he was trembling, something she had never seen before. Drake leaned in close to her, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her. The key opens more than a door, Jasmine. It opens a history. Your father doesn't want anyone to see. Her father lunged forward, his voice like a crack of thunder. That's enough. But Drake sidestepped casually, pulling the remote back out, his thumb hovering over the button. Jasmine's mind was spinning. Why would her father hide something from her? What could possibly be in that records room that was worth all this blood? And Danger Stone's gun was still at his side, but he wasn't moving to stop Drake. And that silence told her everything. Drake gave a mock bow. Ladies and gentlemen of the court, I think it's time we adjourn. Before anyone could react, he pressed the button. Jasmine braced for an explosion, but instead a high-pitched tone filled the room, followed by the crackle of hidden speakers. Then a voice boomed through the chamber, a recording grainy, but clear enough to make her blood run cold. It was her father's voice confessing to something she couldn't yet piece together. Every head in the room turned toward him. Her father's face, drained of color. Jasmine stared at him, waiting for him to deny it, to say it was fake, but his silence was louder than anything else. Drake's laughter bounced off the walls. Now they know. He said, but we're just getting started, and then the lights in the room went out, plunging them into total darkness. The darkness was absolute, the kind that swallows sound and steals breath. Jasmine's hand tightened instinctively on the key, while her other hand reached for her father. But he wasn't there. Her pulse spiked. She spun around, but the air was filled with chaos, shouts, footsteps, the scrape of chairs. Drake's voice cut through it all, calm, like he'd seen the dark time to move, sweetheart. Then the faint glint of his wristwatch flashed. As he brushed past her, she lunged to grab him, but her fingers caught only empty air. She dropped low, listening. Her father's voice finally came, sharp and urgent. Jasmine, stay down. But then the sharp metallic click of a gun being cocked froze her in place. Not her father's voice this time, but Stone's, and it was aimed at someone too close to her to risk moving. Stone's tone was like ice. You're not taking her, Drake. Drake's laugh came back easy, like they were all part of some game. You think you're protecting her, Stone? You're protecting yourself. And we both know why. A sudden flare of light burst from the far end of the room, a flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, revealing that is slumped against the benches, eyes still open, but unfocused. Jasmine's heart twisted. Was he even breathing? She didn't have time to check, because the light swung toward her, blinding her for a second, and then she heard boots pounding closer. Her father's hand grabbed her shoulder, spinning her toward the side. Door go now, but before she could take a step, a deafening bang ripped through the room. The flashlight dropped clattering on the floor, the beam rolling wildly across the walls. She saw it for a split second. Stone standing over Drake, his gun raised, Drake's hand clutching his side, blood seeping through his fingers, but the smirk still on his face. You just made your biggest mistake, Stone. His voice was hoarse but confident. Jasmine's father shoved her to the side door. The hallway beyond was dim, lit only by flickering overhead lights. The smell of dust and something else metallic hung in the air. Run, he said again, but his voice cracked in a way that made her slow, just enough to glance back. His eyes were locked on her, not in anger, but in something almost like fear, not for himself, but for her. She didn't understand any of it. Why was Drake after this key? Why was Stone protecting her sometimes and threatening her other times? And why was her father suddenly a stranger? They reached the end of the hall. The heavy metal door looming ahead. Her father fumbled with his keyring, but it wasn't opening. Jasmine hesitated, then pulled out the small brass key she'd been holding since the beginning. It slid into the lock like it had been made for it. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into shadows. Her father didn't follow. Instead, he pressed the door closed halfway. Between them go, Jasmine. I'll hold him off. Her chest tightened. I'm not leaving you. His eyes softened. You have to if you stay. Everything we've done is for nothing. She opened her mouth to protest, but a loud crash echoed down the hall. The sound of the side door slamming open, voices shouting. Drake's voice carried above the rest. Bring her to me. Her father's hand shoved the door closed, leaving her in darkness. The slam rang in her ears. She turned slowly, her breath uneven, and took the first step down the staircase, each creak under her feet sounding like a warning. The deeper she went, the colder the air grew, until she reached another door, this one smaller, with no handle, just a keyhole. Her fingers trembled as she slid the brass key in and turned the lock, clicking open. She pushed it slowly, the hinges groaning. Inside was a room lined with file cabinets and shelves stacked with boxes, dust thick on every surface. But one drawer near the center was open, a single file folder sitting on top of her name, written in bold black letters. Jasmine reached for it, but before her fingers touched the paper, a voice came from the shadows. I was wondering when you finally get here. She froze, her eyes straining to find the speaker. A tall figure stepped forward into the faint light spilling from the hallway. It wasn't Drake, it wasn't Stone, and it wasn't her father. It was a woman, maybe in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a calm smile, holding a folder identical to the one on the desk. You don't know me yet, the woman said, but you will. And when you do, you'll have to choose whose side you're really on. Jasmine swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. Who are you? The woman smiled. Widen, I'm the reason they've all been lying to. Jasmine's grip on the file tightened, her knuckles pale, her eyes darted between the open folder on the desk and the woman holding the other one. The air felt heavier here, thick with dust and secrets. She couldn't decide if she should run past the stranger or demand answers. The woman took a slow step closer, her voice calm, but with a weight that made Jasmine's stomach turn. You've been told Drake is the villain, haven't you? But what if I told you the man you're Calling father put him exactly where he is. Jasmine blinked, trying to piece together the words. The woman's gaze never left her. You think the key is just to some records? It's not. It's the last piece of evidence that can take down the one person holding this entire city in his fist. And I'm not talking about Drake. Jasmine's chest tightened. Her father had always told her about the corruption around them, the dangerous people he'd fought to protect her from. Now this woman was flipping the story on its head, and she was too convincing to ignore. Were you? Jasmine asked again, this time her voice steady. The woman set her folder down on the desk carefully, like she was laying out a weapon. My name's Marla. I used to work for your father before I realized who he really was. He doesn't want justice, Jasmine. He wants control, the kind of control no one walks away from. Jasmine shook her head, backing up a step. That's not true. Marla raised an eyebrow. No. Then why do you think Stone was protecting you tonight? He wasn't doing it for you. He was doing it to keep that key out of your father's hands. Jasmine's mind replayed the night. The threats, the gunshots, the way her father's voice cracked when he told her to run. It was all starting to blur together. Marla stepped around the desk slowly, closing the distance between them. If you walk out of here with that file, Jasmine, you'll never see daylight again. It won't be Drake who finds you. It'll be the man you trust most. Jasmine's hand shook as she opened the folder, her eyes scanning the first page. A photograph of her father, younger, wearing a suit, standing beside Drake, both smiling, both shaking hands in front of the courthouse. Her stomach dropped beneath. The photo was a document stamped confidential and signed with her father's name. She looked up at Marla. What do you want to do? Marla's eyes softened. Take the file, take the key, and meet me tomorrow night, Pier 17, midnight. I'll show you the rest, but you have to leave now before they get here. Jasmine hesitated, then tucked the folder into her jacket pocket. She turned toward the stairs, but as she reached the first step, a shadow fell across the doorway. She froze, a shape blocking her way out, broad shoulders, familiar stance. It was her father's eyes, dark, unreadable. Jasmine, what are you doing down here? His voice was low. Control to control. Marla's voice came sharp from behind her. Tell her the truth. To tell her what that file in her pocket really is. Her father's jaw tightened, his gaze locked on Jasmine. Give me the file and I'll explain everything. Jasmine took a step back, trapped between them. Her father at the stairs, Marla behind her, the walls closing and her pulse loud in her ears. She didn't know who to trust. She didn't know what was real. Her father's voice dropped softer now, almost pleading. Jasmine, please. That's evidence that could destroy everything we built. Marla's voice couldn't destroy or expose. Jasmine, the choice is yours. Footsteps echoed from above, more people coming closer. Her father reached out his hand. Jasmine, give it to me now. Her heart pounded, her fingers tightened on the folder. She knew whichever choice she made would change her life forever. And then a gunshot rang out from the stairwell. The lights flickered, the sound of boots rushing in, and a voice she instantly recognized. Drake's. Get away from her. The room froze. Drake stood at the bottom of the stairs, his gun leveled, his eyes locked not on Jasmine, but on her father. The Dawes jaw tightened. The two men didn't blink, didn't breathe for a moment. Jasmine felt like the air itself might snap between them. Drake's voice was cold, controlled. Hand her over file. Hit. Her father's hand twitched toward her shoulder, but Drake shifted the gun half an inch, enough to make him stop. Marla moved to Jasmine's side. You got 2 minutes before his backup gets here, she whispered. Jasmine's mind spun back up. Whose side was she even on anymore? Her father's gaze flicked to Marla, venom in his voice. I should have had you taken care of years ago. Drake chuckled low. Years ago. You needed her, and we both know why. Jasmine's grip tightened on file, her chest heavy, like she was holding more than paper. Her father stepped forward, slow and deliberate. Jasmine, I'm your blood. No matter what you've heard tonight, nothing changes that. Drake's jaw flexed. Wrong answer, though. Her, why you made me the fall guy. Jasmine's eyes darted between them, the pieces clicking together. Her father's name on that document, his handshake with Drake, Marla's accusations, every thread pulling tight around her. Marla took a step forward. Tell her about the bribes, to tell her how many families you ruined to keep that chair in the courthouse. Jasmine's pulse roared in her ears, her breath ragged. Marla leaned forward from the front seat. You got one last decision to make. Jasmine hand that file to press, and your father's done for. Keep it, and you control everything. Drake's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. Either way, once you open it, there's no going back. Jasmine swallowed hard, her hands trembling. She reached for the file. Felt heavier now than when Jasmine first held it, like it carried the weight of every choice she'd made tonight. The hum of the SUV's engine filled the silence. Marla's eyes locked on road. Drake kept his gaze on the mirror, scanning for tails. Jasmine's fingers hovered over the flapper, mind replaying her father's voice's warnings of betrayal. She tore it open, the smell of old paper and ink rising up page after page, names, amounts, photos, evidence that painted a picture darker than she could Have imagined judges bought off cops on payroll, politicians smiling next to criminals, a name at the top of every deal. Her father, Jasmine's stomach twisted. But she kept flipping until she found a single page with Drake's name circled in red. Her head snapped up. Drake met her stare. Without flinching, "It's true, kid. I was part of it once, but your father made sure I took the fall. So he could keep climbing." Marla's voice cut in sharp. "He's the reason. Drake's little brother died Jasmine's hands." Trembled, she looked back at the file, seeing the dates, the signatures, everything lining up. Her father's empire was built on lies and bodies. Jasmine's jaw set hard. What happens if this goes public? Marla's knuckles whiten on the wheel. Every deal, every case he's touched for 20 years gets reopened. The city burns. But Jasmine knew there was another option. She could keep it quiet, use it as leverage, control the very system her father once ruled. Drake's eyes searched her. "As you thinking about becoming him?" Jasmine's tone carried no judgment, just the way of the choice ahead. The SUV jolted, Marla swerving as headlights flared behind them. A black sedan speeding up, closing, and Marla cursed under her breath. "Hold on." She took a hard turn down an alley, but the sedan followed, closing the gap. Jasmine clutched the file to her chest. Drake drew his gun, leaning out the window, firing 2 sharp shots. The sedan swerved, but kept coming. Marla floored. It bursting out into an open street. Sirens wailed. Ahead, blocking their path, blue and red lights flashing. Jasmine's heart pounded. She looked from the cops in front to the threat behind. They were boxing Drake. "Turn her, make the call. Kid, do we get to cops or keep running?" Jasmine looked at the file, then at the cops, and made her choice. She shoved the file into Marla's lap. "Drive," she said. Marla didn't question it, spinning the wheel and slamming the gas. The SUV shot down a narrow side street, scraping brick. On both sides, a sedan tried to follow but clipped a dumpster and spun out. Jasmine's breath came in sharp bursts, her decision still ringing in her ears. Marla glanced back. "You sure about this?" Jasmine nodded. "If I get to the cops, my father will find a way to bury it. But if we leak it ourselves, he won't know where it's coming from." Drake cracked a rare smile. "Smart thinking, kid. But you better be ready, because once this hits, there's no safe place for you anymore." Jasmine stared out the window, the city lights stretching into the distance. Her world had just gotten a lot bigger and a lot more dangerous. Marla pulled into a dimly lit warehouse, the kind of place no one would find unless they knew exactly where to look. Inside, a small group waited, laptops, cameras ready. Jasmine set the file on the table, her hands steady. For the first time tonight, she began scanning pages to upload. Drake leaned against the wall, watching her every move. Marla checked her watch. "Once it's out there, we got about 30 minutes before they trace it." Jasmine hit the final key, the last document uploading to a dozen anonymous servers across the globe. A progress bar filled the screen. 10%, 20, 50, 80 done. Marla exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for hours. Jasmine stood straight. The evidence was gone from her hands, but it was in a world now unstoppable. Drake stepped forward. "Kid, you just started a war." Jasmine met his gaze without blinking, then let it come. They moved fast, clearing the place. No one spoke, the tension thick as concrete. When they stepped outside, the air was colder, the streets quieter. Jasmine thought for a moment they'd made it, but then headlights flared from the corner. A single car creeping toward them, slow, deliberate. The driver's window rolled down. Her father sat behind the wheel, his face unreadable. The hum of the engine, the distant drip of water from a gutter, every sound too loud. He leaned out the window, his voice carrying in the still night. "You think this ends me?" Jasmine, "No, this just makes me dangerous." Jasmine didn't flinch. "You've been dangerous for years. I just made sure everyone knows." His eyes narrowed, but there was a glint of something else, pride, maybe, or respect. He gave the faintest nod before the car pulled away, tires hissing against wet asphalt. Marla muttered under her breath, "This isn't over." Drake shook his head. "No, it's just beginning." Jasmine stood at the cold wind biting at her skin, knowing she burned every bridge she'd ever had and built something new out of the ashes. But in the pit of her stomach, she felt the truth. Her father wasn't running, he was planning. And somewhere deep down, she knew the next move would be. As the warehouse lights flickered once, then went dark, Jasmine's phone buzzed. A single text, unknown number. "You got 24 hours." The war had started. The courtroom was silent. You could feel the tension in the air. Every eye was on the judge, who had spent the entire case belittling Sophia, calling her inexperienced, naive, treating her as though she didn't even deserve to be in the room. But now the truth was out. The young woman he had mocked so openly was a daughter of District Attorney Mark Reynolds, one of the most powerful and respected figures in the entire state. The revelation hit the judge like a punch to the gut. His smug expression began to crack. His voice wavered as he stumbled through his words, trying to backpedal, trying to regain control. But it was too late. The damage was done. The jury had seen everything. The court staff had seen everything. And most importantly, Sophia had seen everything. And she wasn't backing down. Her father rose from the gallery, his presence commanding respect. Without even raising his voice, he asked to approach the bench. The judge hesitated, but had no choice. The DA leaned in and spoke quietly enough for only the judge to hear, but the venom in his words was unmistakable. You humiliated my daughter in front of a packed courtroom. You undermined her at every turn. And now you expect me to forget. His tone was calm, but his eyes were fire. The judge opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The DA continued, I could file a formal complaint. I could have this entire trial reviewed. I could even make sure your seat on the bench isn't so comfortable anymore. But that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to remind you that every person who walks into this courtroom deserves respect, no matter their age, their gender, or their connections. The judge swallowed hard, his face pale. The DA straightened and stepped back, speaking loud enough for the entire court to hear. Your Honor, I request that you recuse yourself from this case effective immediately for the sake of fairness and impartiality. The courtroom gasped. Was a rare move, and everyone knew it. The judge tried to protest, but the DA's gaze cut him off. Within minutes, a replacement judge was called in, and the trial continued under fresh eyes. This time, Sophia was given the respect she deserved. Her arguments were heard, her evidence was considered, and the tone of the entire courtroom shifted. The jury listened carefully. The opposing counsel treated her as an equal, and slowly the case began to swing in her favor. By the time closing arguments came around, the outcome was all but decided. The jury returned with a verdict in record time, ruling decisively in Sophia's favor. Justice had been served, but the real victory wasn't just in the verdict. It was in the shift that had happened in that courtroom, a shift toward respect, toward fairness, toward recognizing that underestimating someone because of how young they look, or there is a dangerous mistake. After the trial, Sophia stood outside the courthouse, the sun warm on her face, her father beside her. He told her he was proud, not because she had won, but because she had stood her ground. Even when it would have been easier to walk away, she smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning for her. As they walked away, reporters swarmed, trying to get a comment, trying to capture the story. But the real story was a look on the judge's face as he realized he had just destroyed his own reputation in a single day. And though Sophia had no interest in revenge, she couldn't help but feel that karma had done its job. The lesson was clear. Respect should never be optional, because you never truly know who you're dealing with.